June 5th, 1942. A radio crackles, then another. Aboard the super battleship Yamato, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto stands in silence. The architect of Japan's Pacific Empire, reading messages that don't make sense. Not yet. One carrier hit, then another, then another. The messages keep coming. Fragmented, coded, desperate. And with each one, the same word burns through the static like a flare over open water. Lost. In 5 minutes, the most feared carrier strike force on Earth had been turned into a graveyard of steel and aviation fuel and burning men. And somewhere in the smoke, 3,000 miles from Tokyo, Japan's empire had already died. It just didn't know it yet. So what actually happened in those 5 minutes? And when did the man who built that empire finally understand? June 4th to 5th, 1942. The Central Pacific Ocean, northwest of a tiny atoll called Midway. Japan controls the Pacific. From Pearl Harbor to the Indian Ocean, they haven't lost. Not once. Their carrier pilots are the best in the world. Their admirals are confident. Some would say dangerously confident. And then, in a single morning, everything changes. Welcome to Echoes of Valor X. Today, we follow the story of the Battle of Midway, not through dry statistics or textbook timelines, but through the eyes of the men who lived it. The pilots who dove through flak, the sailors who watched their ships become infernos, and the admiral who built an empire and watched it burn. To understand June 4th, you have to understand what Japan believed about itself in the spring of 1942. They called it shoribyo, victory disease. It's the sickness that comes from winning too much, from stringing together so many victories that defeat stops feeling like a possibility. It stops feeling like something that can happen to you. Pearl Harbor, the East Indies, Ceylon. Raid after raid, the Japanese First Air Fleet had struck and vanished, untouchable, unstoppable. The same carriers, the same pilots, the same commanders, drunk on their own invincibility. Admiral Chuichi Nagumo commanded that fleet. 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, the fist of Japanese naval power. He'd been there at Pearl Harbor. He'd watched Spitfires and Hurricanes fail to stop him in the Indian Ocean. He had no reason to believe Midway would be different. The plan was simple, in the way that arrogant plans always are. Strike Midway's airfields, bait the Americans into a decisive engagement, destroy whatever carriers they had left, force Washington to the negotiating table. Admiral Yamamoto, the man who dreamed up Pearl Harbor, had designed this operation personally. It was supposed to end the war. Instead, it ended Japan. June 4th, early morning. The sea is calm. Nagumo launches his first wave against Midway. Over 100 aircraft, screaming off the flight decks in the gray dawn light. The pilots feel the wind. They smell the salt. They are the best. They know it. The strike hits Midway hard. Let the airfields survive. The American defenses, battered but breathing, send back a message Nagumo doesn't want to hear. We need a second strike. Here is where history turns on a single order. Nagumo's reserve aircraft, the ones sitting in the hangar decks, have been armed with torpedoes, ship killers, loaded and ready in case American naval forces appear. But no American ships have been spotted. So Nagumo gives the order. Rearm them with bombs. We're hitting Midway again. The mechanics get to work. Torpedoes come off. Bombs go on. Fuel lines run hot. Ordnance, live, dangerous, volatile, gets stacked in the passageways because there's no time to stow it properly. Then, the radio crackles. An American ship spotted. Then another. Then the word that changes everything. Carrier. Nagumo freezes. He needs to recover his Midway strike force. Aircraft returning low on fuel, pilots exhausted. Nowhere else to land. He needs to rearm his reserves. Again, back to torpedoes. And he needs to launch against the American carrier right now, before it launches against him. He can't do all three. The Midway strike lands. Aircraft crowd the flight decks. Fuel hoses snake across the steel. Half-rearmed planes sit in the hangars alongside loose ordnance, bombs and torpedoes and ammunition, all of it waiting for a spark. Far above, the American dive bombers are already descending. The Japanese combat air patrol has been pulled down low, hunting torpedo bombers that came in wave after agonizing wave at sea level, most of them dying before they could release. Those torpedo bomber crews flew straight into hell, and they knew it. They went anyway, and in doing so, they cleared the sky above the carriers. At approximately 10:22 a.m., Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey leads his dive bombers from the Enterprise over a clear patch of ocean. He's been searching for over an hour. Fuel running low, doubt rising, and then, there they are, 4 fleet carriers, spread out below him like targets on a training range. Flight decks crowded with aircraft, no fighter cover above them. He pushes the nose over. What follows takes 5 minutes. Akagi, hit, then hit again. The bombs punch through the flight deck and into the hangar. They detonate among the stacked ordnance, the fueled aircraft, the torpedoes still sitting in the passageways. The explosions don't stop. They multiply, each one feeding the next. Sailors race through smoke-choked corridors with fire hoses that can't compete with what's burning. The steel begins to glow. Kaga, same story. Bombs in the hangar, ordnance cooking off, damage control teams dying before they reach the fires. Soryu, 3 hits, 3 minutes, done. 3 of the most powerful carriers ever built, the pride of a nation, the symbol of Japan's dominance, are on fire and dying. 3/4 of Nagumo's strike force, gone, in 5 minutes. Aboard the Akagi, Nagumo's flagship, the reports come in wrong at first. Fires reported, damage control underway. Words designed to sound like problems being solved. They're not being solved. The fires on Akagi spread faster than anyone can track, racing through spaces packed with fuel, through corridors where loose ordnance cooks off in the heat, through compartments where men are fighting blind and smoke so thick they can't see their hands. The ship that had launched the attack on Pearl Harbor, the vessel that had sailed undefeated across 2 oceans. And Nagumo, the admiral, the conqueror, the man who had never lost, has to be helped off his own flagship. Not in triumph, not in defeat even, in the way you can stand up straight and call yourself defeated. He transfers to the cruiser Nagara while his carrier burns behind him. The greatest naval officer in the Pacific, abandoning his ship. There is 1 carrier left, Hiryu. She'd been positioned separately. She'd escaped the morning strike. And Nagumo sends her pilots in with everything they have, one last swing at the Americans. They find the Yorktown. The American carrier takes hit after hit. She lists. She looks finished. She's burning. For a moment, just a moment, it feels like the battle might still be salvaged. A carrier for a carrier. Mutual destruction instead of total defeat. Then, late afternoon, American dive bombers from the Enterprise find the Hiryu. She burns. All 4 carriers. All 4. The last poker chip is gone. Aboard the Yamato, hundreds of miles away, Admiral Yamamoto receives the news in pieces. This is perhaps the cruelest part of the story. Not one report, not one clean moment of understanding. Instead, fragments. 1 carrier hit. Pause. Fires on Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu. Longer pause. Hiryu has been struck. And then the final message, the one that cannot be misread, cannot be softened, cannot be explained away. All 4 carriers lost. Officers present on the Yamato described Yamamoto as a man absorbing blows he couldn't block. This was his plan. His plan. The architect of Pearl Harbor. The man who had told the Japanese government, before the war even began, that he could run wild in the Pacific for 6 months, maybe a year. But if the war continued beyond that, he could promise nothing. He'd been right. And now the clock had run out. Yamamoto considered night surface action. Send in the battleships, close the distance under darkness, destroy the American carriers with gunfire, what aviation had failed to finish. It was a desperate plan, the kind of plan you make when you have nothing left but pride and tonnage. He abandoned it when reports confirmed the American fleet was withdrawing east, beyond reach, beyond darkness, beyond any last act of salvage. There was nothing left to do. On June 5, 1942, Yamamoto issued the order, "Withdraw. All forces retire toward Japan." Those 3 sentences were the end of something. Not just a battle, not just 4 carriers, the end of Japan's offensive war in the Pacific. Back in Japan, the public heard something very different. Great victory at Midway. The carriers were never mentioned. The pilots, hundreds of them, the irreplaceable core of Japanese naval aviation, men who had taken years to train. Their deaths were classified. Survivors were quarantined, isolated, not allowed to speak of what they'd seen, what they'd lost, what they knew, because the truth was too dangerous. Japan could build new carriers. They did, but you cannot build a pilot in a factory. You cannot train in 6 months what takes years. The men who had sunk the Prince of Wales, who had bombed Pearl Harbor, who had ranged from the Coral Sea to Ceylon, they were ash on the Pacific, and their replacements would never be the same. The naval officers who knew, who had been there, who had read the real reports, carried that knowledge privately. A stone in the chest. A truth they couldn't speak. Japan could not win. Midway had proven it. The battles at Guadalcanal, at the Philippine Sea, at Leyte Gulf, they would all confirm it, over and over, with mounting cost. But Midway was the moment it became true. Admiral Yamamoto would be dead within a year, his transport aircraft ambushed by American P-38s over Bougainville in April 1943, shot down in an operation made possible by the same intelligence advantage that had doomed his carriers at Midway. The Americans had cracked Japan's naval code. They'd known he was coming at Midway. They'd known his route over Bougainville. He never had a chance. There's a particular kind of tragedy in the Midway story that goes beyond tactics and tonnage. It's the tragedy of certainty, of men so convinced of their own superiority that they couldn't see the ambush forming above the clouds, of a nation so committed to the story of victory that it couldn't learn from its own defeat, of an admiral brilliant enough to know the war was unwinnable, who fought it anyway and designed its most decisive turning point. War doesn't care about certainty. It doesn't care about plans or pride or the number of victories on your record. 5 minutes. That's all it took to change the world. The Akagi rests somewhere on the floor of the Pacific, 2.5 miles down, along with Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. Silent, dark, unreachable. They've been there longer than most of us have been alive. They will be there long after we're gone. If this story found you, if these voices from the smoke reached you across 80 years, then leave a comment below. Tell us what you felt. Tell us what you didn't expect. And if you want to hear more forgotten stories, the ones history books bury in footnotes, the ones that deserve to be told, subscribe to Echoes of Valor X. Because the echoes are still out there. We just have to listen.